By the time you see this video, the Ukraine spring or summer offensive should have begun, but the question on everyone's lips for the last 6 months of the war has been, what's next? There's a tendency to think that everything hinges on the coming offensive, but the truth is, no matter what happens, the war is unlikely to end this year. While most people hope the coming offensive is successful, even a complete failure won't be enough to end Ukraine's military resistance. And barring a complete internal collapse of the Russian military, another rout similar to that suffered in the fall of 2022 also won't be enough to end Russian occupation. In preparation for this offensive, Ukraine has pulled an unknown but significant amount of troops from the front lines. This is why for months there has been little movement on the front, as tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers, artillerymen, and tankers were all pulled to the rear areas or sent out of the country to train for the coming offensive. Famously, a month ago, a video was released of British soldiers providing an honor guard for departing Ukrainian soldiers who had just wrapped up months of training. The UK, Poland, and other NATO nations have been hosting Ukrainian crews training for the coming offensive. Accelerated training on the Leopard 2 tank has been a priority, but training on new 155mm howitzers, multiple launch rocket systems, and Patriot air defense systems have all been ongoing for months. A vanguard force of an unknown number has been training under NATO instruction for months, with the UK, Finland, New Zealand, Canada, the US, the Netherlands, Denmark, and the Baltic countries all sending instructors to help prepare the troops for the task to come. Ukraine has opted to fight a defensive war through the winter of 2022 into the spring of this year, making almost no new gains and simply holding what it took back in the fall. But this was a big gamble, with tens of thousands of troops pulled off their front lines for specialist training. Ukraine has invested big into the coming offensive, and luckily for it, its frontline troops have largely held their positions against the Russian onslaught. The Battle of Bakhmut, which has now been raging for 10 months, has been a strategic boondoggle for the Russians and absolute godsend to the Ukrainians. Many have criticized Ukraine for holding a strategically worthless city, even as they criticized the Russians for expending as many as 100,000 men attempting to take it over the better part of a year. News reports ran stories for months of U.S. generals advising the Ukrainians to pull out, and of President Zelensky refusing to. However, it's only now that we've learned just how devastating a toll Ukraine has exacted on Russia for a completely strategically worthless village, with an estimated 100,000 dead and wounded in this one battle alone. Ukraine has suffered as well, though its estimates are far lower given that they were on the defense, with about 15,000 to 20,000 killed, and all has not gone according to plan. Through intense pressure and the sacrifice of thousands of Wagner prisoner recruits used in human wave attacks, Russia has managed to close the vice around Bakhmut while taking a huge toll on Ukrainian forces. The situation was so dire that Ukraine was forced to pull some of its elite special forces training for the coming offensive to reinforce Bakhmut and beat back a Russian flanking attack. These were forces that Ukraine was hoping to keep fresh and fighting fit to be used when it came time to attack, and it was forced instead to dedicate them to Bakhmut or suffer an encirclement. But Bakhmut has served to focus Russian efforts across the east, allowing Ukraine to concentrate defenses there and freeing up its best forces to undergo months of training. While it's been a meat grinder for both sides, history will almost certainly prove Ukraine the winner, if simply because it managed to completely exhaust Russian forces over months of fighting. And even now, reports from Bakhmut are coming in which might hint at what's to come. Early in May, Wagner Group's Prigozhin warned that due to the Russian Ministry of Defense cutting off his troops from supplies, he was going to pull out of his positions. For months now, the Russian MOD has played a cat-and-mouse game with Prigozhin, with neither side having much love for the other. It all comes down to a rivalry between Prigozhin and his private military company and the Minister of Defense Sergei Shoigu and the Russian military he oversees. Putin has kept both jostling for his favor at each other's throats, the way any good dictator sows chaos amongst his subordinates to prevent them from banding together against him. But the personal drama has led to open firefights between the two groups and now a supply embargo, leaving Wagner forces without ammunition or shells needed to keep fighting. There's a strong possibility that Shoigu had purposely cut Wagner off right before the PMC took the whole of Bakhmut, as now Ukraine is hanging on to only the very western outskirts of it. Perhaps Shoigu wishes to take Bakhmut with the regular Russian military in order to deny Prigozhin the prize he's been fighting over for nearly a year. This would not be unheard of, given that the Russian MOD took credit for the capture of Soledar earlier this year, despite it having been Wagner who did most of the fighting. The move drew a litany of protests from Prigozhin, who began to openly criticize the MOD and Shoigu himself via social media in what would be tantamount to sedition in any other government. Indeed, the Russian army, which holds the flanks around Bakhmut, have been making slow gains in an attempted encirclement. If they were to succeed and close the pincer around Bakhmut, the army could claim victory and once more leave Prigozhin out in the cold. Prigozhin might have seen this coming, as he's now announced that he was considering pulling Wagner out of the war completely multiple times, with the most recent threat to drawing condemnation from Russian generals who said that Wagner abandoning his positions would be punishable as treason. Prigozhin warned that on May 10th he would leave his positions unless his forces were immediately resupplied. Taking the threat seriously, the Russian army opened up its stockpiles, then promptly shut them back up again, prompting a new round of protests on May 9th. This infighting may be what decides how the war plays out next. Russian regular forces may be attempting to close the vise on Bakhmut, but on May 8th the news broke that the Russians were in retreat across parts of the southern sector as Ukraine forces counterattacked. While since there's been no sign that this was the promised theater-wide counterattack, it's speculated that Russian forces might have feared it was. They've known for months that Ukraine was massing for a counterattack, and remember the massive rout suffered in the north and the fall of Kherson. Western influence and psyops have also been targeting Russians both at home and on the front, and there's speculation that at least some Russian troops may have been breaking and running from fear of being caught up in a massive attack powered by Western tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. The gains have been small, but they have effectively stopped any attempt to surround Bakhmut and brought the few thousand Ukrainians still defending the city a bit more breathing room. However, the breaking and running of Russian troops could be emblematic of just how poorly Russian forces are prepared for the coming offensive. Ukraine has not been the only one preparing for a coming attack. Russia too has been doing what it could to prepare to defend what it's taken. Miles upon miles of trenches, dragon's teeth, and minefields have been laid out to stop or slow Ukrainian attacks. Leaked intelligence shows the Russians have also been organizing special task forces to take on Western tanks when they make their appearance. And this might be the smartest thing Russia has done all war, which is setting a pretty low bar. The world is waiting with bated breath to see Ukraine attack Russian forces with Western Leopard 2s, Bradley IFVs, and eventually Abrams main battle tanks. Much has been made about the capabilities of these vehicles versus their Russian counterparts, and for the most part the assessments are true. This has created a sort of global hype though, and Ukraine won't just be fighting for its territory when it throws Western tanks into the battle, it'll be fighting for public support. Russia knows many Westerners oppose the sending of tanks and heavy IFVs, and they have expended great efforts to scare the West into ceasing arms supplies to Ukraine via threats of nukes and other fantastical terror scenarios. If Russia can use special task forces to destroy Ukrainian-operated Western tanks, it could prove to many in the West that it's fruitless to continue sending large amounts of very expensive equipment. Likewise, Russia also knows that its own troops are scared shitless of the capabilities of Western equipment, and destroying dozens of Leopard 2s could do miracles for the ever-dwindling Russian morale. Likewise, runaway success for Ukraine on the backs of American Bradleys and German Leopard 2s could turn Russia's significant morale problem into a full-blown crisis. There's few Russians who don't remember the performance of Western hardware against the same Soviet equipment they're now operating in Desert Storm. Russia's military is simply too large to be defeated in a single, even wildly successful counterattack. But a morale crisis could spell the doom of Russia's war efforts. It's happened before, with massive mutinies rocking the Russian imperial military in World War I and leading to revolution. Putin's special Western tank killer forces might not be fighting for the future of the war, but for Putin's personal future as well. Ukraine has been well equipped for the coming battle, including American M58 Mikhliks for handling Russian minefields. These mine-clearing charges shoot out a line of explosives a few hundred meters long, then detonate to create a clear lane for tanks to advance. Ukraine has also been provided with the engineering vehicles necessary to clear paths for heavy vehicles through thick Russian minefields and destroy Dragon's Teeth and other anti-tank fortifications. America's most senior generals have commented that they are satisfied that Ukraine has all it needs for the coming offensive. In all likelihood, the offensive will take place near Zaporizhzhia, as Ukraine's best move would be to punch through the middle of Russian lines in order to reach Mariupol and sever Russia's southern forces from resupply. However, recently Ukraine has been fighting small skirmishes along islands on the Dnipro, pushing Russian forces off of them. A nationwide call for life vests and small boats has led to many speculating that Ukraine might surprise everyone and launch an offensive directly across the Dnipro. However, it's incredibly unlikely Ukraine would opt to do this, as it would be very difficult to move heavy equipment across the river. Russian sources have speculated that Ukraine may attack in the north and into Russia itself, taking Belgorod, prompting a small panic in the Russian border region. However, this is incredibly unlikely, as President Zelensky has repeatedly stated he has no plan to take even an inch of Russian territory. This is also unlikely because doing so would seriously anger Ukraine's NATO partners, who don't want to give Russia any reason to escalate the war to the nuclear threshold. It would also sour the opinion of some in the West, and public opinion is all important to the continued resupply of Ukrainian forces. And resupply is the name of the game, because barring a miracle, Ukraine's coming offensive won't end the war. Instead, it'll eat up massive amounts of equipment, which will all need to be replaced by Western nations. And this is Ukraine's major advantage over Russia. Russia has the manpower, but it has very little metal. Ukraine, meanwhile, has been building large amounts of metal via donated Western vehicles. But it isn't enough, and what has been pledged needs to be immediately resupplied, because no matter how good Leopard 2s and Abrams are, they will be lost in combat. Russia still retains the air advantage, and tanks are notoriously allergic to air attack. If Ukraine fatigue sets in, the nation could see the supply of Western equipment drying up. And there is no doubt that despite the heroism and ingenuity of Ukraine's defenders, they would have been defeated long ago without Western weapons, financial support, and intelligence. At this moment, it's a race between Ukraine and Russia. One side is building a massive manpower pool, and the other is trying to equip a far smaller pool with far more advanced weapons. Without the West and the support of its populations, Ukraine will lose this race and the war. Luckily, the current U.S. President Joe Biden has reaffirmed his long-term support for Ukraine, with yet another $1.2 billion aid package being recently announced. And this package is a spicy one. Amongst the announced aid is much more 155mm artillery rounds, which U.S. factories have been expanding their capability to produce at breakneck speeds. Also included are more air defense systems, though the exact nature of which are unannounced so as to deny Russia critical intelligence. However, educated guesses point to more Patriot and NASAMS batteries, as well as Stinger systems for foot soldiers. Also included are more and new radars and missiles. But perhaps most importantly is funds dedicated to figuring out how to integrate Ukraine's Soviet-era kit with modern American weapons. Ukraine has a lot of Soviet kit, and there's simply no ammo for it. American agents have been scouring the world for every available S-300 missile they could get to feed Ukraine's air defense batteries, but inevitably they've been coming up short as global stocks from friendly nations dwindle out. Yet the S-300 systems remain fully operational, they just have nothing to shoot. This is where a US-led effort to integrate these systems with modern US munitions comes in, because if a workaround can be found to integrate missiles such as Patriot interceptors or SM-3s or SM-6s with Ukraine's Soviet kit, then that's significantly cheaper than having to provide entire air defense systems, and it would dramatically improve Ukraine's capabilities. There's some precedent for success, with some very clever American engineers figuring out how to jerry-rig US HARM missiles into Ukrainian MiGs. However, it wasn't possible to make the two systems fully compatible, limiting the effectiveness of the American-made anti-radiation missiles. Something is better than nothing, though, and Ukraine put its HARM missiles to fantastic use even in their limited capacity, seriously degrading Russian air defense radar coverage and artillery counter-battery radar. What's got everyone talking, though, is an unspecified amount of, quote, classified aid. This has set the rumor mill ablaze, because there's a lot of very fancy US kit that Ukraine could put to great use liberating Russians from their lives. Some have predicted that this would end up being the ATACMS missiles that Ukraine's been asking for, but that's unlikely as President Biden has been stubbornly refusing to provide that weapon. This hasn't stopped the UK, who is seeking a way to crowdsource with other nations the cost of purchasing Storm Shadow long-range attack missiles for Ukraine. With a range of up to 300 kilometers, Storm Shadow missiles can be fired from Ukrainian jets with no problem and would put targets that Ukrainian HIMARS can't reach at risk, leveling the playing field significantly. There is speculation that part of the classified aid could be the American LRASMs, its latest generation of long-range anti-ship missiles. These stealthy missiles take a dramatically different approach to the new generation of Russian and Chinese anti-ship missiles. Instead of flying incredibly fast, they fly at subsonic speeds with an internal jet engine. But where they have the advantage is in their stealthy design and advanced artificial intelligence. The actual detection range of an LRASM is classified, but they have the capability of significantly reducing engagement time for surface ships, dramatically improving the odds of a hit. LRASMs can be fired from either planes, ships, or even ground canisters. It's unlikely that they're compatible with Ukrainian jets, but with a range in excess of 300 nautical miles, LRASMs launched from Odessa would reach Russian ships almost anywhere in the Black Sea. And sinking the Russian Black Sea Fleet is a priority for Ukraine, as it's those same ships Russia's been using to launch volleys of cruise missiles against civilians. While the Russian Navy is too terrified to leave port, their ships still make great launch platforms for long-range missiles. Sinking these ships would severely limit Russia's ability to launch cruise missile strikes, but it would also inflict devastating financial cost to Russia. NATO is keenly interested in seeing the Russian Black Sea Fleet turn into the Russian Black Sea Marine Preserve, as it would end Russia's days as a naval power in the region. Thus, while remote, the possibility of LRASMs being provided to Ukraine is not zero, but one weapon could define the war to come even more than Western tanks: F-16s. Ukraine's been asking for Western F-16s since the war began, and the West has been reluctant to provide them. The issue is complicated. As Russian air defenses remain formidable across the front, the F-16s would have a tough time operating with such dense air defenses. For its part, Ukraine wants a way of knocking Russian bombers and fighters out of the sky and help to keep its troops safe from air attack. Without some significant development on the battlefield, though, it's unlikely F-16s are the best option at the moment, and thus the US has been reluctant to provide them. Now go check out Russia Just Lost Biggest Tank Battle of Ukraine War, or click this other video instead.